regarding the budget, so I will turn it over to City Manager Bob Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. You have been workshopping since January on the budget, and we're now to the point where some of the macro issues we talked about are going to help guide us in terms of some more micro decisions that we're looking at. What I'm going to do is allow Elizabeth Goltry to address the big picture first, where we think we're going to be financially at the end of our 3 fiscal years that we're looking at, and then talk about strategies on moving us forward towards a balanced budget. Now, I will remind you, you will be eventually approving a 2026 budget, but you're not formally adopting it. So what we're trying to do is show trends and some suggested strategies for getting us balanced in 26. Formally, you won't do that until next year at this time. But I think it's extremely important, given the financial situation that we're projecting, that you start to take some actions and give us direction on how we should move forward to address the issues that we'll face in 26 and beyond. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth to give you start with the background information.
Good afternoon. So the outline for today, a lot of that he's already mentioned, but I'm going to, as the city manager mentioned, we have had a lot of workshops. Our first one was in January, and then we had them every month through April. We've skipped May, and we're back to this one in early June. If you're joining us for the first time and are just getting interested in the budget this year, you can find all those videos on YouTube. Today in this PowerPoint, I will provide some background on resident engagement that has happened so far and what's yet to come in the next month, and that would be the budget simulator, and then provide an overview of our financial outlook. And then we have a number of tiered budget options in a handout, so we'll go through those, and really the idea behind that is for you to give us feedback on what you would like to find out more about, what you would like us to research or consider as we look toward next year's budget. And then, of course, we'll end with a calendar. As far as resident engagement goes, there was a community survey last fall, and that resulted in the quadrants that we've been using this year. There were budget roundtables in January and March that used the quadrants as a taking off point, and then 2 social media events in April that were focused on 2 areas in the magenta quadrant: street maintenance and crime prevention. Then we visited all of the DABs in May, and through all of this feedback, we've heard a variety of voices and perspectives, but I think that generally the feedback suggests that the things that are priorities, particularly in the magenta quadrant, resonate with residents, and that this framework is a good way of organizing the budget process when it comes to priorities and how to spend our time and our efforts. And then next, the budget simulator is launching this evening. So this is something we've done in the past. Well, here's the quadrants that we've used to guide the budget process. And then I'll go into the budget simulator in a bit. Just as a reminder, when it comes to the budget, the general fund budget, most of it is public safety. Fire and police is 59% of the budget. And then when you look at what the budget is spent on, most of it is salaries and benefits. And then the next largest slice is public works and utilities, and about half of that is for streets. So when people talk about what is a priority in the community survey, the community survey residents' priorities very much aligns to how the general fund budget is allocated. And it's also important to keep in mind that we're in a very service-heavy business, and employee costs are usually about 3/4 of the budget, and they're the fastest growing part of the budget. So that being the case, when I show you the simulator, what you'll notice is it's very difficult to balance the budget in 2026 at this point without impacting positions and without impacting those 3 largest components of the general fund budget. As the city manager mentioned, the budget for 2025 isn't what we're focusing on today, it's the budget for 2026. We're facing a structural deficit, and that's due in large part to two elements. One is wages that are growing much faster than revenues, and then also interest earnings are expected to decline during this period. We're already this year to date, seeing some weakness in revenues. I had mentioned in at least one previous workshop that franchise fees is a very, very volatile revenue source, and that was much higher due to commodity prices for natural gas. And year-to-date, revenues for franchise fees for natural gas are about $1.5 million lower than they were last year. And then also sales tax revenue year-to-date is down about 1%, which is less than $500,000, but still not as encouraging as it had been in the past. So we're already seeing, and those results will be presented to you in the second quarter report that the controller's office puts together. So those trends that we've been talking about, like we're already starting to see those things happen, and we're able to weather those challenges right now because of interest earnings. But as interest earnings decrease, we lose our ability to weather those cyclical challenges with some of those more volatile revenue sources. So I was jumping ahead of myself before. This is a screenshot of the budget simulator. So what you'll notice here is it shows, when you get to the start screen, the deficit in the budget simulator is the same as the deficit that you'll see in your handout, the deficit of 12.9 million, which is the same is what we're projecting as the deficit for 2026 at this point. And in the simulator, we did things a little bit differently this year than in the past. So in the past, things were grouped by types of service. Maybe parks and libraries were together, or public safety was together. What we did this year that was a little different, and we'll see how it goes, is that we grouped things based on the quadrants in the community survey. So this one, as you can see, this is lower quality, higher importance services. So you can decrease and increase those services. But in some of the other quadrants, you can only decrease services. So it's a little awkward, but I'm gonna go over to show it to you really quickly how it works. So there's an intro screen. And so, for example, let's say you wanted to decrease public information services and you thought that was going to balance the budget. It really doesn't get you very far at all. So that's what you'll notice as you move through it, is back to that pie chart, that some of these services are a larger part of the budget than others. So as you try to balance the budget, a person would notice how difficult it is. It is possible to balance the budget using the simulator, but it's definitely not easy. So, so here's the lower quality, lower importance quadrant. A user only has the ability in this quadrant to decrease services.
Go back to lower quality, higher importance.
Yes.
Where is crime?
Crime prevention doesn't in our, that's a really good question. So crime prevention in our accounting, and like our divisions, it's embedded in the police department. There's not a crime prevention division per se. So.
Or would that be in one of the 4 categories on the left?
Pardon?
Where would it show up?
I think police services is over here, and their options connect, the decrease ones, I know that the text definitely connects to community policing and crime prevention. If they were to have reduction in staffing levels, that it would impact that service.
Will that be confusing as the magenta box, if you go back to lower quality, higher importance? That tab on the left.
Right, I understand, yeah. Not everything in those boxes is in the simulator, because additionally, not everything in those boxes is in the general fund. So we did our best, but it's hard to translate everything into the simulator. It's also, the other weakness of the simulator is it's really hard to, this is increasing and decreasing existing services that already have budgets. If we were to say, we were to consider a completely new service for 2026, something we'd never done before, it doesn't lend itself to this tool because this is only increasing and decreasing. So it has limited applicability, but I think it's still interesting.
I guess I'm going to add one more caveat to all of this. If you go to high quality, high importance, and I know that police services is the first one, because the magenta box shows that crime prevention is the number one thing that people want us to focus on, which is of low quality but high importance.
Right.
How will that also be, I guess if you're going to put it in police services, will that also have some comments regarding crime prevention?
It does. And the good news too about those two, because they're both higher importance, they both have the decrease and increase options. Does that make sense? So you have the same choices that you would if it were lower quality or higher quality. But yes, the options relate to crime prevention. So this one talks about more opportunities for positive police interactions with the community, more non-enforcement contacts. And from editing the reduction, it talks about increased response time, and it also talks about how there would be less time for proactive patrol and community engagement. I can still edit the text to, I guess, include more text about not community engagement, crime prevention, but that's where crime prevention mostly is at this point, would be in police.
So I will speak for myself because, again, I've been showing this community survey in community, focusing on the magenta box. And the magenta box, the number one thing is crime. Whether it's reflected on the low quality, high importance in the survey or in the simulation, somewhere in the high quality, high importance during police services, that portion, it should, in the very first paragraph, should talk about crime prevention in some way.
Okay.
I wonder if we can't move police services to lower quality, high importance. Because I like the way the narrative works for the police services, because it's not just police officers. It does talk about proactive and reactive services. And if you look at the quadrants in the orange, police services is right at the margin. So we're not really fudging too much. I mean, if you take those two and average them out, they'll still be magenta. So I think, I don't want to confuse residents that do this. And if you do police services in one spot and crime prevention in another, we've had a hard time getting people to fully understand that. In fact, what we're going to bring forward to you is a comprehensive program is going to be involving crime prevention and crime reduction. So it's a combined strategy as we go forward. So I don't have a problem with putting police services in with lower quality and higher importance, moving that in, so that'll.
I think it correlates with the survey
Yeah.
results. So I just feel like it's not placed in the correct quadrant at the current moment based off of the results from there.
Okay, and then what I will do is, I think that we were planning on launching this immediately after this meeting, but I'll place pause on that and get this edited and it moved around, and then we can launch it tomorrow. Does that sound okay? All right. And then while we're at it, so these are the lower quality, higher importance, so street repair. And keep in mind that street repair is something that's in the CIP and in the operating budget, and so this is the operating budget side of street repair, which is more of the day-to-day work. So economic development, public information, probation monitoring, and municipal court. So there's a few things in magenta that aren't here just because they're not in the general fund.
I do have one quick question
Yes.
about this slide. particular. So it's under street repair, would that be different than street development, so our dirt streets program?
Yeah.
That fall under street repair, because it doesn't look like it? I mean, granted, I can't click on it.
Yeah, yeah, you bet. So their street repair, the operating budget's role with dirt streets is the maintenance of them. The paving of dirt streets is something that's in the CIP.
Okay, so separate, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a lot. So over in higher quality, higher importance, police will move out of this one, but we have fire services, and the decrease options in fire services match what's in your handout. Well, the 10% fire services option in the simulator matches what's in your handout. And so some of them do, and there's a lot of options.
Explain what you mean.
So some of the options in the simulator don't always connect to the handout.
Oh,
Does that make sense? So there's a few options in here about park maintenance, but they don't necessarily connect to the same dollar amount or the same change in strategy, but the fire services one does. So it just, the numbers aligned well. And then these are the lower quality, lower importance, which I believe are green. And so the only options available here are reductions. And then rounding things out is the blue. And again, these are the only options, excuse me, are reductions here.
So will the results of what people, I guess, submit, will they get captured and provided to us?
Yes, so the plan at this point is to have the simulator open through August 8th, which is when you have the evening budget hearing. And so I think that will give us I think that, to me, the timing lined up nicely, that we're getting in-person feedback and then finishing our online feedback. It also gives us plenty of time to pitch this to a lot of community groups that we've been in contact with and people through the roundtables for them to share it. And then I think that will give us enough time to get the results put together and to share there's a workshop, I think or a budget hearing, I think August 13th. So it's a quick turnaround, but we should be able to share then.
The one caution that we should talk about right now at the front end of all this is no one tool should be relied on as being the determining factor for your decision, right? It's a matter of how much feedback can we get you from different sources to help you in your decision-making. Because this is not a scientific survey, and so if a group decided they really wanted to stuff the ballot box for one issue, they can do that. The citizen survey, on the other hand, is a scientific sample, and so there's a little more reliability in that regard. But you're going to have what we get from community groups, what we get from DABs, I mean, the whole engagement process. And I just wanted to point that out, that this alone shouldn't be what we rely on solely. So.
Yeah, and if anything, it is not easy to balance the budget using the budget simulator, just because of the deficit that we're facing. If anything, I think it's a great tool for education and awareness in the community of what it takes to balance the budget, and also is a good taking off tool as we move into the next budget cycle. So.
We've had people who refuse to balance the budget and then in the narrative section, they say raise taxes. So, I mean, not everybody will get to a balanced budget. This year especially, it'll be very difficult.
And what do you all feel about the comments? Are you interested in getting comments? Just mention that. Yes, no. No, in the simulator. It's okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'm open to seeing comments as well.
Okay, very good. Yeah, it's so funny to have a workshop in this room because it doesn't feel it's like we kind of need to get used to just talking. It's such a big room. So, and that's the survey, that's the simulator in a nutshell. I worked with Corey Bukta in January to generate interest in the budget roundtables, and we had a lot of people who had interest and people who came, and I think that could be a good taking off point for sharing it with community groups or newsletters or things like that. And I'm always kind of surprised when people ask me when the simulator's coming back. Like, it's kind of intriguing that people enjoyed it, so,
Elizabeth?
yes.
And Councilmember Johnson and I had the privilege of speaking in front of some students yesterday, and one of the questions they asked is, what's our favorite public engagement activity? And I said, the budget simulator, because I really do. I love this. Can you remind us how many people participated in it last year?
Oh, good. We didn't use it last year.
Or the year before,
So
the last time we
That's
did
an
it.
easy answer. I cannot.
Let's not shoot for that number this year,
Yeah,
right? Zero.
right. Yeah, no, I cannot remember, but I can get back to you. But I would say it was maybe around 3,000.
Which is good.
Yeah, it doesn't sound overwhelming, but if you imagine a line of 3,000 people lined up to get to the podium, that is a.
And it takes a minute to do, right? I mean,
yeah.
somebody has to kind of sit down and navigate through the system. So
Yeah.
I appreciate anybody in the community who's willing to be invested in to take their time to learn more about our budget.
Yeah, and it takes time, but then one of the reasons why we selected this tool is, I mean, I was moving these things back and forth with a mouse, but they're pretty easy to do on the screen of a tablet or a smartphone, just to move, instead of typing in numbers on your phone, which is really difficult. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. And so we're going to have it open for quite a while this year, about 2 months. So there's just, I feel like, more opportunities for that kind of group rollout and engagement than we've had. One year, I think we only had it open for 2 or 3 weeks. So that's the story on the simulator. You ready to go back? Okay. So F5.
I asked how in previous iterations of this simulator did we communicate with City of Wichita residents besides local media on the opportunities
Yeah, opportunity.
a participant in this?
Yeah. I know that we've leveraged the district newsletters in the past, social media. I think that our timing might have been a little different, and we had it available when we presented at DAB meetings. Those are some ways. I know that I've also used it at some meetings that are outside the budget process. For example, Leadership Wichita, when they had their government day, we used that one year just to give them a taste of what the budget is like. So there's always room for more, though. And students are a great idea.
It might be an interesting concept too, and I don't know, just brainstorm off the top of my head, but at the libraries where people use our computers, if maybe there could even be some sort of little, something stuck up on the screen saying, hey, while you're here, because it might be a way to engage different voices and people who might not normally be as aware of it or as inclined to take it, but while they're there, maybe, and especially if they're there to get away from the elements, the heat or whatever, maybe they take a few minutes to let us know their thoughts.
Yeah, there's moments when I realize maybe I was smarter before COVID happened, because I'm pretty sure we did that in the past. Yes. No, there's just lots, and since it's open for 2 months, we can continue to build on that. So please share if you have other ideas or places, or just even maybe somebody who's involved with a community group and wants to take it on the road but is not very confident. We can always set up a Teams meeting and get them going, things like that. So we have about, I think, 9 weeks that it's going to be open. So lots of opportunity to engage more people. So it's a neat tool. All right, ready for what's next? Okay. So this is nothing new, but in case you're just joining us, this year, as I mentioned, we are expecting another year of strong interest earnings, and that being the case, that we'll have funds available for some one-time community survey priorities, and that we're also spending our time positioning for the next 3 years. In 2025, the budget is nearly balanced. That'll be a period of service stability, but at the same time, that'll be a transitionary period where we'll be working on prioritizing innovating and implementation of some of the concepts, or maybe all of the concepts in this handout, and other things that we'll be working through with staff in the community. So it's going to be a transition period. We have a lot of work ahead. And then in 2026 and future years, that's when we'll have service realignment that'll be necessary to address these structural issues in the budget. I mean, it is just a fact that interest earnings will be decreasing, and that because salaries and benefits are such a large portion of our budget, that we do have structural issues that need to be addressed.
Elizabeth, when do we, in our projections, when are we projecting the interest rates to be cut, and to what percentage are we projecting them?
Yeah, Mark is right behind me, so how lucky am I?
Well, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I'm not going to answer it directly, but we're Fed watchers. We are not Fed prognosticators. So, as you know, originally they were going to do 4 cuts this year, start in March, and then they were going to cut in June, and now we'll find out in a couple of weeks. But the prognosis now is that they'll maybe cut in September. So our model is based on a decline in interest rates, because that seems to be what everybody believes is going to happen. The real 2 key questions are, how fast are they going to decline, and what's the terminal rate going to be? Is the terminal rate going to be 2%, 3%, 2.5%, 0? And how fast are they going to decline? So we have some scenarios, which you'll see. You're about 2 slides ahead of Elizabeth, actually. We've modeled several different scenarios, a pessimistic one, an optimistic one, and a moderate one. And the good news is our moderate forecast, we think, is one we would recommend at this point, and we think we can increase our revenue estimates based on our moderate forecast, which is to say now we don't believe interest rates are going to drop as fast as we did last year. But as to when they're going to start dropping and how far, I really can't answer that with any level of certainty.
Okay, yeah, I just didn't know if we figured it into our projections. And from what I've been reading, I think what is the 10th is the next Fed meeting.
Right.
And they're saying there's probably not going to be cuts, and it's 2, or is it 5.25% to 5.5% right now?
Yep.
So in our projections, are we projecting down to 2%? Is that the
Well,
the
again, I've
worst
got
case
3
scenario?
scenarios. Yeah, one of my scenarios is 2%, one of them's 3%, one of them's 2.5%. For the terminal rate, we're talking 2, 3, 4 years out. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but I mean, I'd be happy to share it with you, but I have models where I know where all my maturities are and what I can reinvest in. Reinvestment risk is really the risk we're talking about here, so
Right. It's like
Like I say.
predicting the weather 2 years out. So,
yeah, it's a challenge.
yeah. Thank you.
All right, so on to the handout. This handout is a variation on a handout that was prepared in 2020. And we put the concepts in that handout at the time in a variety of different categories. So tier 0 is technical adjustments. Those are largely things that are already occurring. Tier 1 are some changes to cost recovery and some process improvement changes that most likely wouldn't impact service delivery for the end user. Tier 2 is service level reductions. These are in lower priority services or internally facing services. And then tier 3 is where things get, the really difficult decision-making happens. These are service level reductions to higher priority services, wage and benefit changes, and discussing the CIP and the budget go together. So capital project funding, and then finally the use of reserves. So as I've mentioned, the 2025 budget is basically balanced. What we're talking about is 2026. What we're looking for is feedback on what kind of concepts to pursue, and I have a timeline in the back. Though the budget is balanced, there's still a lot to do to put it together. And these are the kind of concepts that we would include in our transmittal letter and budget issues. They might not be itemized out in the budget at this point because they're still under development. But we're looking for that sort of feedback today to get us a head start. Because these are big issues and they take time to do in a way that's thoughtful and least impactful to the community. And here's, this is the PowerPoint version of the table that's on page 1 of your handout. And so what you'll see is that until you get to tier 3, these concepts don't result in a balanced budget. So it's really hard to balance this budget without making difficult decisions. And that's the same thing people are going to realize when they're working on the budget simulator. So the tier 0 technical adjustments. Interest earnings is the first concept. There's a table on page 2 of your handout that is a table that sums up what Mark was speaking of. There is a lot of uncertainty in this area, but if we were to change our interest earnings assumption in the budget from our base case that we have in right now to a moderate outlook, that would improve, that would get us closer to being balanced. So that's that concept. So there's really, and this is something that we're continuously evaluating, and I think if nothing else, reporting this table shows that there is some uncertainty when it comes to interest earnings, and we'll continue to keep an eye on that. The fuel contingency is exactly that. We added that to the budget when there was more volatility in gasoline and diesel prices. We didn't need to use it last year. Budgets and departments for fuel were adequate, so that would be the elimination of that contingency. And then similarly, there's a snow and ice contingency that's budgeted outside of departments, and that would be eliminating that. It wouldn't impact service levels, but if there weren't enough budget in the public works budget, we would have to look other places at year end.
And what,
Oh, go ahead, Mayor.
Sure.
and what are those? So it's 416 for fuel, snow
Yes.
is 750. Could both of those get lowered slightly?
To
Well,
be
because-
to less magnitude? Yes, that is exactly, yes, I said, let's talk about issues, but also the magnitude of what we would include, that is another thing we're thinking about. Yes.
I was wondering if maybe we could, so are we talking about lowering it or eliminating it entirely, the contingency plans?
So there would be 2 options. One would be to eliminate the contingencies, or the other option would be to make the contingency smaller.
Is there any way we could combine the 2 contingencies and then just give it a pot of money and see how it goes? And then if we have to do a budget adjustment mid-year like we do on some of our items and feed some more money into it?
Yeah, I mean, that's something else we could look at, so. And then recreation, I put this in tier 0 because they're already working on improving cost recovery for their recreation programs, so I put it in tier 0. Some of the other cost recovery items are in tier 1, so that's why it's there.
Could you explain that a little more? So are we looking to hold steady on
Recreation?
subsidy for Parks and Rec?
Yeah, they've already, we put together the budget, we put together a base budget, and they have increased they have revised their revenue estimates based on increasing their rates.
If I can, the Park Board has reviewed this, and there was a significant amount of discussion that took place at the Park Board, if I remember correctly, using this model, the cost pyramid. And the idea was to adjust rates for those let me do it the other way. To try to maintain rates at an affordable rate for those who could least afford our services. So those who are lowest income in our community or have no other alternatives for recreational activities or limited alternatives, we tried to keep the rates low or have no fees for those services. And then as you go up the pyramid and you start talking about those who have a better ability to pay, they've made adjustments. And there was some discussion, and I don't remember if they enacted this, but there was even some discussion about services that are regional that having a 2-tier system, and so that Wichita residents would have a lower fee than non-residents. And I'm not sure if they actually implemented that, but there was discussion. So that gives you an idea of the philosophy that they've been following.
So trying to keep summer camps square and make sure that we're not bumping up summer camps or scholarship programs for them, but
And if they were, they're very small increments, if I remember right.
Yeah, or another strategy is maybe increasing rates for swimming lessons, but then having more scholarships through the Red Cross program, things like that, so. So on to Tier 1. There is a picture of the cost recovery pyramid in your handout. I wish I had put it on a slide. It's on page 3. This is something that we talked about quite a bit, probably during the last recession, regarding cost recovery. And the city manager just summed it up nicely. But it's probably time to look again at some of our services related to cost recovery. And just as a rule of thumb, for government or general fund services, those governmental services, we usually aim for 50% cost recovery for services. So the first one is Cowtown cost recovery. And that would probably, I think there's a relatively new director on board there, so this would take, this is for 2026, so there would be some planning involved for the organization, but some time for planning for them. The second one is naming rights at parks and cultural facilities. So again, there's some time to work on this, but I think there's potential, sounds like.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
are you talking about staff or council working with for-profit, for public-private partnerships similar to what we did at Stryker? Or can you explain what this means a little bit to me? Thank you.
Yes and no, or no and yes.
Okay.
So yes, in terms of similar to what we did with Stryker, but not putting the burden on the council. Instead, we've been working with a consultant to look at opportunities for sponsorships similar to Stryker. And to give you an example, the ICE Center they've identified a number of sponsorship opportunities at the ICE Center. Same at the Riverside Tennis Center. And then the consultant, we would hire the consultant on a fee basis to then find the sponsors and negotiate the contracts.
Okay.
But the council would approve the list first of the facilities that we would look at.
That was going to be my
Yes.
next question. And then my next question would be just curiosity about the cost to hire the consultant, because, they have to eat what they kill, right? They have to be
That's
able.
exactly right, and that's built into the projections.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I have a follow-up question.
And by the
regarding-
way, this is all going to come to you in the future, because we have a preliminary draft of their report. They need to finalize that. I need to get that to the council, and then we need to talk about going further.
Well, the only quick question is, so projected over 2026, 27, 2028 would be 1.5 million.
Yes.
To those 3 years. What do we believe the full capacity if we named every one of our cultural arts facilities? Like, how many facilities does this include?
The report, I have to go back and look, but it almost doubled that. So we're trying to be conservative in what our ability or success rate will be in the early years.
Thank you.
yeah, I anticipate the dialogue around this one. I think we got to look at it, but I also think we need to be mindful and make sure a lot of our facilities are aptly named for people or places as well. I'd hate to see Target, Watson Park, or something along those lines. So I look forward to chatting about this one.
So it could have a lot of potential for an archery range. So the next one is also related to cost recovery. Planning charges for services recover about between 20 to 25% of costs to deliver those services. So that would be looking at that. And those, unlike planning and like park fees, those are set administratively. Planning charges for services are approved by the city council. The next one is animal control has been something there's been a lot of dialogue about in the budget process. And there was also there's just over time, there's been decreasing dog licensing revenue. There's also a couple of positions that were added to the budget a few years ago for a pilot project. They've never had full staffing, so we haven't been able to evaluate the effectiveness of that pilot project. So this concept, which is very early, would be to consider repurposing or redirecting some positions to focus on dog licensing, which would improve cost recovery related to dog licensing, and then also potentially improve outcomes related to animal safety. So that is that one. So, but not cat licensing, just dog licensing. This is hard enough. The next one is something that involves the finance department. That would be centralizing accounts payable. And by doing that, that would result in some positions being eliminated in departments and potentially positions being added to the finance department, but a smaller number of positions would be added in the finance department than would be eliminated in other departments. And there's some other positive outcomes associated with this change, particularly for our vendors that are mentioned in the handout.
And any employees that would eventually be lost due to the changes, they would be giving ample opportunity to find other positions within the city.
Yeah, we have in our HR policy, it addresses those types of situations.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so this is a new territory, right? That we went from ARPA to this. That's a great question. The next one is paperless timekeeping. There are a variety of different scenarios in departments for timekeeping. In many departments, it's still paper-based. This would be moving us into paperless timekeeping, and it would make timekeeping more accurate and also could save staff time. And then the following one is interesting, related to the crime prevention discussion. There's some work that's ongoing, doing an inventory of current programs provided by the city of Wichita, and there's the alignment of those programs to crime prevention and those outcomes, and also looking at other best practices that could be used to address crime prevention. The Special Alcohol and Drug Prevention Fund doesn't have a tremendous amount of capacity, but there could potentially be capacity from that fund to transfer into the general fund to offset some of those costs that are related to crime prevention in ways that combats alcohol and substance abuse. So that's kind of long-winded, but there's some potential there, and it's exciting because it connects to those crime prevention efforts. The next one, fleet maintenance. So fleet, they maintain all of the vehicles for police, fire, public works, and parks, and et cetera. And we also, our heavy equipment is purchased through the CIP. And I mention that because streets and parks have longstanding vacancies of around 20%, and we'll get to those issues later in this handout. Looking at the size of our fleet, at the types of vehicles that we're deploying, and those maintenance intervals could have both a positive impact on the budget from the standpoint of the charges that fleet passes through to the users in the general fund, but can also free up some capacity in the CIP. So it's kind of probably something you don't think about a whole bunch, but it has, it's a pretty expensive cost, and there's some potential there. Oh, and that's on the next slide. So sorry, everyone. I'm behind myself. Oh, we're going to skip through that one. So now we're on to Tier 2. So do you have any feedback today about Tier 1 before we move on to Tier 2?
So I had a quick question on accounts payable. When you
Yes.
say positions eliminated, is that for good, or do those folks move to other open positions?
I think this is a matter, this needs to be evaluated. You know, like, consider what this looks like.
Goes back to Councilmember Holheisel's question. So those positions would be eliminated from the departments. Some new positions would be created in finance, And then the remaining positions or individuals would have the opportunity to bid into or to move into vacant positions that we intend on filling in the organization, similar to what we've done in previous times.
Okay. And then on municipal court, saying that the volume of court has decreased, is that because of the backlog we had with COVID and we've caught up and now?
No, I'm sorry, I skipped that one. Thanks for bringing that one up. There's fewer tickets being written. So that transaction piece of municipal court is lower than it used to be. However, there's a lot more work related to probation, substance abuse. They manage the special alcohol contracts. So the concept isn't just to eliminate positions, but to also look at repurposing positions. Because they're really doing some interesting work related to crime prevention. Everyone's doing interesting work, but their work has changed over time.
Quantify that activity decrease from municipal court?
We could certainly, there'd be two ways to do it. One of it would be transactions or things they process, and the other one would be revenue.
That's part of the study. We're in the process, we're doing a process study right now.
This was probably not what was intended on number 10, but it sparked that I think would probably fall under a tier 1 concept is like a paperless city hall. I know that's the paperless timekeeping is different, but just what the cost savings for that would be as well across all departments.
Yeah, and accounts payable actually kind of connects to that, not in the looking for services, but in how our vendors do our work with us. There's probably some.
I know we would have to
potential
take an adjustment up here, but
No, but I think there's a lot, there has been of one of the things that's happened from the pandemic is just a lot of automation and technology that's been something to keep up with. So that's certainly a neat idea to consider.
cost savings and just environment.
We can prove, at some point, we can have a presentation that Jamie can give you regarding what we've done to move into a paperless environment.
Yeah.
And we're
But-
not fully there by any means, right? But our records are moving into a
Yeah,
paperless.
so I'll add that to the list. Does that sound good to add to the list? Okay. Yeah, I think it's remarkable. We get new printers every year. You guys probably know this. We get new printers every year, and this year, the cost of printing has gone down so much, and there's so much less printing that they've changed the cost model for it. It's like printing has become one of those things like long distance. It's just doesn't happen like it used to.
I will add to Councilmember Hoheisel's point on the naming rights. I'm looking forward to that discussion as well, and I think we can do it in a way that honors names as well. It could be the Hoheisel Park sponsored by, such and such business. That way we honor the name and still can benefit from those revenue sources.
And I think you'll find that in the recommendations, and there's some untouchables. We're not going to rename C2, but I think you're right, there are some creative ways you can deal with it, and maybe even deal with facilities, with rooms inside Century 2, that type of thing.
So if someone offered $1 billion to rename the round building, we wouldn't do it.
Takes 4 votes.
All right, are we ready for tier 2 or tier 3? Well, we're ready for tier 2, right? Okay.
I don't think
Goodness.
they'll ever be ready for tier 3.
Yeah, I don't
But
think
let's-
we're right. So tier 2, as I mentioned before, these are adjustments, and these would be adjustments to service levels. They're not just a matter of innovation. These would be adjustments to service levels, that things that are in the green or in the blue. So the first one on the list is cultural arts agreements. Right now, cultural arts agreements they tend to increase every year based on the increase in assessed valuation growth. It's not implausible that if we had declining revenues in other areas, like I've mentioned with franchise fees and sales tax, it's not implausible that our AV growth would be greater than our overall revenue portfolio growth. So you could imagine a situation where cultural arts agreements are increasing, but then we're decreasing, having to decrease services, our own City of Wichita services. So that is an invitation to think differently about those agreements. The library materials option is one that we've considered that has occurred in the past. There were reductions in 2020, and then funding was restored in 2022. That's what that is. And the main result is generally longer wait times for popular materials. The code enforcement one is interesting. If you'll bear with me. We have, the budget's been increased for this area by about $200,000. And so what this reduction would require some thinking about how code enforcement cases, how forced actions are, which forced actions are prioritized. And there's some, so for example, when there's less nuisance abatement, what they've noticed is that there's an increase in illegal dumping. Or non-emergency demolitions is one that could be de-emphasized, but that is something that could have an impact on housing supply or the ability to do infill development. So all of these have different impacts, but it's on the list because it's an area that has been increased in the last few years. So that is code enforcement prioritization. Facilities is another division that has a vacancy rate around 20%. This has impacted performance, but facilities is an operation that has, they have a core internal staff, but they also have the ability to outsource some work to contractors and, you know, for custodial, you've probably seen the contracts come from Board of Bids custodial or trades and those types of things. So the concept here is to evaluate what is done by in-house staff, what is consistently contracted out, and to think about that more strategically and also potentially save money from vacant positions. So that is that concept. And I think also too, there's a lot of value, not just in looking at the how, but the what. So there's some seasonality in our facilities. Some of our facilities are all hosting these different activities and have different occupancy loads and schedules. And considering it would have to be a pretty thorough analysis. Any questions about facilities?
Not a question, but just a comment. Are you still on facilities?
We are on
Okay,
facilities.
yeah, I'll hold.
Okay. All right. The next is golf, and this is a little bit like the fleet topic where I said that you know, the heavy equipment that the fleet fund cares for is paid for out of the CIP. So this one really has the greatest impact on the debt service fund. But when you help the debt service, when you improve capacity in the debt service fund, you also improve the outlook of the general fund because it allows you to have potentially more flexibility when you look at allocating the mill levy between the two funds. Currently, the golf fund owes a debt service fund $5.7 million. So this concept is to put the golf fund on a 15-year repayment schedule back to the debt service fund. And so that is that one. For when the golf fund lacked the capacity to service this debt, the debt service fund serviced it for them, and then the debt was re-amortized, and then now this is just the principal portion. The debt service fund took care of the interest
So
part.
that'd be about 400,000 a year?
It's, yes. And again, we could look at different schedules for this, but it is, if it weren't pursued, it would reduce the capacity for the debt service fund. And as we move into tier 3, you'll see why that could create challenges.
When's the last time that there was a payment made back to the debt service from golf?
That's a good question. I will get back to you. Mark thinks it's 2005 or 6. I feel like it was more recent than that.
I'd like to find that out
Yeah.
if that's possible.
Yeah, you bet. we have a schedule for it, so of
They're
course we
just
do.
starting to turn things around, and I would hate to rob them. They need irrigation, they need a lot of things. They just redid the clubhouses, got new golf carts, and I would hate to just
Yeah.
take all the money from them.
Right, I think that's why this is a 15-year schedule, a different repayment, and I picked 15 years because it was originally a 15-year debt. But different repayment schedules could be considered, so,
Was this for the construction of Auburn Hills?
Yes.
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 Was it?
Yeah, I would, if the council's willing to have the discussion, we probably ought to put an, put an end to all of this, right?
think so, too.
We've been carrying on the books for a long time, and there's been discussion about whether or not we should continue to show it as an obligation, or whether the city should just say, we've used property tax dollars for that, and then not seek recovery from the fund. I think it's an important policy discussion to have. It's not something you don't just write off the debt. I think you need to think through that. But previous councils have wrestled with this as well. So,
Part of that is the houses being built on a golf course are worth more than houses not on a golf course. Property taxes are higher on those houses, so there's more revenue for the city because of that golf course that was built.
Right, there has been some suggestion that you treat this like a TIF, right? And that you had an increased value because of the the golf course, we had increased value from the houses. But those who were around at the time in earlier discussions said, we knew all of that, but we still believe that the enterprise fund should pay for the cost of the golf course. So that was the original thinking, and the TIF thinking has come later afterwards, but.
When was Auburn Hills built? Do you know?
That's
20 years ago?
I think 2001, yeah,
Yeah, I'd like to have a conversation about what that looks like.
okay, yep.
Are we done with golf now? Number 16, I will not be in favor of reducing any sort of money going towards MABCD. I mean, we're just about where I think we need to be, but even then, I'm interested in discussions about how we combat especially illegal dumping, which I believe is now the #1 cost with MABCD. But, yeah, I'd have a hard time looking at any sort of reduction going that way, and I would just straight out not be in favor of that one.
So should it not move forward? Should we still work up concepts for this, or just not work up any concepts for it
I think concepts should still be put on the
Okay.
table for discussion.
at all? Okay. Got it.
I agree with Councilmember Hoheisel. We are doing some really good work now. I'm fine with the discussion, but I won't be supporting cuts to CD.
Me 3.
I'll just throw something out there, and it's maybe not, it's along the same vein, but it's more about the dumping part that Councilmember Hoheisel brought up, even more than tall grass and weeds and, dangerous structures. But when I went to visit the Real-Time Crime Center a couple years ago in Fort Worth, one of the things that they utilized their camera system for was also in areas that were high targets for illegal dumping, and it helped decrease it was prevention, right? Instead of, going and cleaning up afterwards and then having to, pay to have it dumped and all the different things. So I know that, crime prevention is certainly a high priority, and we want to make sure that that's the priority for the Real-Time Crime Center. But it was an interesting concept that they did. So I still have them on my notes from the visit if anybody wants to learn more. And then, happy Deputy Chief Duff went with us too, so he would have some insight. But maybe thinking of just a little bit different way. And a real-time crime center is, lower cost than some of the other traditional ways that we deal with this.
Right, because of discussions I've had primarily with Councilmember Hoheisel, MABCD, Public Works, and Police are working on maybe bringing a strategy forward that would do that very thing. Yep.
Yeah, and those types of, not to advocate for that particular idea, but those types of ideas where you're maybe investing in something new or standing up something new in the next year to get ready for 2026 and potentially reduce the demand for something in the future is something that we have capacity and thankfully a little time on our side. So that's tier 2. Any other feedback on these? Okay. The tier 3 concepts are difficult. These are things that are high priorities in the community survey. They're really related to our core services. And so, but as you've seen in the table at the front of the handout, there's no way, I mean, there might be other concepts that we haven't uncovered. And if you think of them, definitely share. This is just the beginning. But it is based on the handout in that table, there's no way to get to balance without touching tier 3. So number 19 would be that once the SAFER grant expires in March of 26, that those positions would not be retained.
Question about that. What would be the difference between, is it a salary increase between 2026 and 2027?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's just would be for April through December in 26. It's prorated. It's not the whole year. Great question.
Now, we would need to retain a majority of those positions to just staff the fire station that we currently have in the budget. Is that correct?
If this option were considered, or again, we also talked about looking at the variations on it, that's something you would consider is how do you staff the current complement of fire stations and the new one that's being built?
Okay, well,
There's a lot of complexity to this one, right? So it would probably involve changing the staffing model that we recently adopted, right? In terms of how many firefighters we have on various pieces of apparatus. You're not going to close stations, so you talk about that. It also would have some impact on the plans we have for new stations. So again, remember, we're not necessarily advocating this, but we're trying to give you an idea of the magnitude of the kinds of issues that we're facing in order to get that balance, especially in the years 27 and 28.
I appreciate the discussions. I'm always going to be supportive of getting to the 4-minute response time the best we can. And if that includes adding fire stations and whatnot, I want to follow, my personal opinion is to follow through the plan that we currently have and ensuring that we have the appropriate staffing levels at those positions. So I guess we can continue to talk about it, but that's just my take on this one.
I might push back on that a little bit. I think we need to look at all options to make sure we have a balanced budget, and that's a pretty big number. So,
Well, that is true, but at what expense? Public safety for people that aren't accurately covered? And that's our job, is to protect them too.
well, 4 minutes is the optimal time. What's the average time in major cities?
I don't know.
What's the response time for police? You get robbery or something, what's the average time there? It's a lot more than 4 minutes. So you have to balance the police coverage with fire coverage, with all the different needs of the community.
But we can't talk about public safety and that be one of the major things that we cut.
Well, you have to balance things out.
I think when we're looking just at things like this, in terms of a policy discussion at grants, just making sure that grants are sustainable, so we don't get used to a certain level of staffing or a tiered staffing approach, and then those have to expire later on. So my concern is when we debate grants over the course of the next few years, that we always take that in mind, that if a grant expires, we're on the hook for the funds afterward. So I think that should just be policy discussion, so we don't add to the burden for the years moving forward.
Well, along those lines, we can't use a SAFER grant reapplication for these particular positions. That's correct. Am I thinking correctly here?
We could not for this funding round.
Well,
Now, if the council took an action that indicated that these positions or some of them would be deleted at the end of the grant period, then I think we have the ability to go in for safer for a retention of positions.
Okay. So when, and then SAFER is a yearly application for SAFER.
I believe it's annual.
But we didn't apply for it this year.
No, because this doesn't expire until
Next March.
26, and so we wouldn't have been eligible for retention.
I guess this would be a question for Chief Snow. Does she anticipate any SAFER applications over the next couple of years?
That is a question for her we can get answer.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think that would be a good element to include in this. If we look, it looks like there's questions related to this, and so that would be a good element to include in that. Right. Park maintenance, again, like many other divisions, they have a vacancy rate around 20%. Their operations include forestry, turf maintenance, also caring for structures in parks like playgrounds and shelters and the like. They use contractors for a lot of their services. There's a long-standing contracts in place for turf mowing and then for some other maintenance activities, but they still have had underspending. So this one, we would be looking at their preferred outcomes. It could potentially impact service levels, so mowing cycles and things like that, but could result in savings. So right now, they have been underspending due to vacancies, but this would be, rather than just just freezing them at their current staffing level and their current service delivery model, thinking about it more strategically moving forward.
Is it every 2 weeks we mow a park?
Depends on the type of asset. So I think that there's 7, 14, and 21 cycles.
I tried to get Bob to do no mow May, but I couldn't get him to do it.
You know how many complaints I got in my district about
I know.
other people
My
exercising no
district
mow
would like
May?
it.
Yes.
I did
Just do
suggest
close to the
that.
river.
And then the citizen survey is statistical. It's a random sample. We ask about people's districts, and we can see how it turns out. Can be all sorts of fun.
Second.
I think when we had our workshop, half of our first jobs were mowing lawns, so we can hop out there and help
Well, that's cool.
some of the cost.
Yeah.
Put that in the ordinance, part of the council members' duties. You got to mow a park a month.
Elizabeth, we have 15 minutes.
Okay.
District 6 can use the push mowers too, so they don't pollute.
We'll use the little electric ones.
All right. Well, I'm going to scoot to the last 3 of the services, and then we have some internal concepts. One, the police department. As you all know, there are a lot of vacant positions in the police department, and they have been filling their recruit classes and training new staff, but there's still turnover. People retire. The cost of the vacant positions right now is around $3 million. That's probably an untenable concept to freeze them at their current staffing level. But in this idea, police recruit classes would proceed, but staffing levels would be the same, so it'd be more of a one in, one out concept rather than graduating more recruits than there are current staff to keep up. There's also some alternative, they have been engaged in some alternative staffing models with community service officers and the like. So this concept, if you had any interest in it, we would research and develop some options for your review.
So what that means, we would be frozen at current employment level or the ones that we have budgeted?
The $3 million is what that would be. Does that make sense? Your current, so you just have kind of a one in, one out.
So our
But
current
as I
staffing.
mentioned earlier on, there's, we can adjust the magnitude of these. We can consider other options.
So let's just assume we had 50 vacancies in police officers. This is basically, you would stay at that 50, right? So your recruit classes would be sized in anticipation of what your retirement and normal retirement and departure rate would be. That's the concept.
So,
I guess look at options with this one, but we're just now getting back to the level we need to be with officers on the street. So I struggle with this one as well.
I do too.
The alternative here too is not to put the brakes on staffing at all, but to be clear-headed about what their vacancy rates will be based on their current level of staffing and how many recruits they're gonna be training in the current year and build that into the model. We wouldn't know that until closer to the kickoff of budget workshops next year.
So where does the 3 million currently go that we're saving on
A lot of it goes to overtime.
well,
Yeah, some of it goes to overtime, and then some of it's just general fund savings.
okay, well, if it's, we're paying for overtime instead of paying
Yeah.
for the salaries.
That's what I was just gonna ask, and I'm sure smarter people than I have looked at this, but is there a point where we're paying more for overtime than we're paying if we just filled the position? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've done an analysis of that before, and
Yeah,
I
I
could
figured you
include
had.
that in this. So kind of like a break even for overtime. Yep, you bet.
And then I also worry that, overtime sounds great because it's more money in your pocket, but, we talked about this before when we did the bonus and the pay increase for police. It's about money, but it's also about morale. And,
Right.
We want to make sure that we aren't relying on overtime when maybe it's just burning our police officers out, and that's why we have problems with retention.
Right.
That's
in the
the biggest
simulator.
issue. That's exactly right. We're
Can
to
you
the
say
point
that
now-
again? I'm sorry, Bob.
It is.
We're to the point now where the chief has a hard time filling positions for overtime because of the workloads and the length of time that we've been short-staffed, so.
Now, some of this might be impacted by the real-time crime center going forward. We might be able to find redundancies and eliminate some of the duties that some officers have.
Well, I
So-
think you'll hear when we bring the strategy forward, where there are a number of things we can do to improve service levels that don't necessarily add a lot of bodies, but they are, through use of technology and other methods, better data analysis, we can do better jobs on deployment. But the chief can go through all that.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, I've got my note here, look at overtime break even, but just even if things are full speed ahead with the recruit classes, the police department is the largest part of the general fund budget, so it's probably worth digging into and reporting back on. So if that's fair. Street maintenance, this is another one with 20% vacancy rates. I really did calculate them all. They all are about the same. The CIP does the big street maintenance, the big, an entire section of street being maintained. The operating budget does more things like potholes and routine work. And so, like a lot of divisions, they've been stretched. And this would be, and they do have savings at year end generally, and this would be an evaluation of what should be done in-house, what should the service levels be, what could be done with contractors, and that sort of evaluation. So, and then the last one on this slide is transit. There's a transfer to from the general fund. It's static, unlike transfers from some other, from the general fund to some other services, so that's why it's in tier 3. So, and it's probably not the best timing for them because they're moving past having their pandemic relief grants.
So could you explain that one a little more?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the general fund transfers out to a number of services, we do half of floodway, half of planning, net of their cost, their fees. And so those float based on how much the cost of those services are to provide, but the transit transfer out is static. So that's why I put this one in tier 3 instead of in tier 2. So it's just not increased. So, but
It
those,
seems to be such a smaller, way
is
smaller number
smaller.
than the other ones.
if you want to kick it off the list, we could do that. Or just, I know you've got a lot to do tonight, so maybe feedback later would be just as effective time-wise, so. The next few things, the next two are employee compensation and benefits. The first one is health insurance plan redesign. I'm just gonna intro this topic. This would be, looking and having an external partner help us look at our health insurance plan options, and then also to look at what other options like employers are offering now. There's potential cost savings with this. And then also, it could be that health insurance isn't the draw to future employees that it used to be in the past, but then we would still make sure that for our current employees, like plans would be offered. So that's that. It's just a good housekeeping thing to be doing.
I know this will probably be a policy discussion at some point, but I'm very interested in what Commissioner Howell had said regarding looking at partnerships with the county regarding wellness centers and how that might adjust how we look at healthcare in the future. And so I know there will probably be a policy debate regarding that, but in terms of a cost-saving analysis, I'd be interested in the model that Textron is using. I know they've had it for over 2 years now.
Okay.
So seeing if that's a model that the city could do and if there's a cost savings with that as well.
Okay, good. Thanks.
I know I enjoyed tremendous benefits of this health plan, or better than anywhere I've ever worked. They're way too rich. Way too rich. So I don't know how we can sustain that. It's caught the health care going up so much.
I'd also like to know what our employees think about that as well.
Right, like an employee survey.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course they like the great health care plan. I like it when I'm here too.
But I
But can
think-
we afford it? That's the question.
Yeah,
But I
but
do
I
think
think so if they want to keep that, I mean, so I have all the best stuff and I pay for that. If I want less, I can pay for less. There's two options there. But I think if our employees are benefiting from it and they want it, we should take care of them. I don't think we should reduce that or give them something that won't cover all the random needs. You never know what may happen to you. You never know when some medical condition that you weren't ready for pops up, and if you have subpar coverage, then we just kind of hurt our team. of
Well,
people.
on major medical, you're probably always taken care of. It's whether that office visit, do you pay $5 for it, or do you have a deductible that goes towards it? I mean, that's where the real cost is.
I think all we're looking for is a direction, because we do have an employee committee that works and brings recommendations to you whenever we have changes in health insurance. And if the council's desire is to come in with another tier or to look at some additional cost savings, and we can work with the employee group over the next year and see what options we can identify.
I think this is an issue that's extremely important to me. The number one cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States is medical costs. And so, we can not compete with the private industry. I know that there's many departments within the city of Wichita where our employees could easily go into the private sector and make more. But one of the things that does tether them here, tether talent here, is because we have affordable benefits for them. Not all of our employees are making are probably not compensated as they should be already. So this is an area that I'm going to be trying to be protective of for employees. I think it's very important.
In that same sense, I think when you look at the wages, have the wages of city staff caught up to the private sector? If they have, then we need to look at that insurance too.
So that's number 25,
But
which is
real quick,
employee
this-
Good
compensation.
policy
Well,
discussion.
one more point of
Yeah.
clarification here. So are we talking like, we'll give them options like you can earn $2 extra an hour if you take the lower or the no plan? Are we looking at trade-offs here for that, or is it just strictly what we offer to the employee?
All we're asking is, do you want us to look at reform of our health plan? There'll be all kinds of things. If we empower our employees to take a look at it, if the council's saying, this is a rising cost, we've identified it in the budget for over 10 years as a continued rising cost. If you want us to address some options, then we'll engage employees and our health advisor on that.
There you go. So the next one is employee compensation. So this one, in the future, so there's two ways an employee's pay increases. One is, depending on if you're exempt or non-exempt, you could receive a step increase or merit increase. And then the other way that an employee's pay increases is by an across-the-board pay increase, which we call the general pay adjustment. This concept would be having no more across-the-board general pay adjustments except if they are included in current bargaining unit agreements or agreements currently being negotiated. So people would stay in the same wage scale, the table would be the same moving forward. So that's that concept.
So when you say unless included in current collective bargaining agreements, does this mean any union negotiations from here on would be held to the step increase or the merit
Yeah,
increase?
what we would model in the budget for future, as contracts expire, we would model in no across-the-board increases. We would only model the step increases.
This strategy was discussed a lot during the recession by the council. I don't think we went to just straight steps, but we had very limited cost of living increases during that recession period. So I think what we're, just trying to get guidance, or actually trying to set the stage for if we have revenue challenges, it's going to be hard to deliver above cost of living or even sometimes at cost of living. And so I'm not expecting a lot of direction today other than, it's because 70% of our cost are tied to wages and benefits. That's why the health insurance and the compensation issue is here in front of you. So
I understand that perspective. I also feel like that's kind of tying our hands as to any future adjustments we might need to do if there are certain departments that are falling behind in employment. So I guess options, but I don't know that I would necessarily be in favor of any changes there.
yeah, and I don't know that we would not bring something to you as part of the 25 budget, but if everybody understands wages should be on the table for considering 26, 27, then that's what we'll have to bring some options back.
You mean to vote on in 2026?
You would vote on them next year in 25.
I thought you were pushing that to 2026.
Yeah. Yeah, but
Well,
you would,
yeah,
they
well,
would be first starting in 2026, yeah.
If we can move to 26, Elizabeth, if you don't mind, I'd like Mark to talk about
Oh,
this
okay.
for a second, because he's got an interesting perspective that would help us from a policy standpoint on some approaches to our debt and to our capital funding that we've never really talked about before. So, Mark?
So as you know, we have a CIP that has a lot of general obligation projects in it. General obligation projects are generally paid for with the mill levy. We levy about 7 mills to the debt service fund of our total mill levy of about 32 mills. That allocation is up to you. Whether we allocate 7 or 10 or 2 or 5 or whatever, that is up to you, and we present that to you each year. Now, I would say the CIP is like a battleship. It's hard to make a tight turn. So if we approve a project today, we're probably going to finance that project 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. So just to give you perspective, that's why we included this in 2028, I believe. But the concept here is that we use general obligation or mill levy funds for the top priority in the CIP, which is maintenance. That is the top priority of the CIP. That aligns with the comprehensive community plan. Any enhancement or expansion projects, we would have to identify an alternate source of revenue for. That would allow you to lower the mill levy in the CIP. This is modeled after $500,000 in 28, and you would have further flexibility the further out you went as our old debt fell off. But again, the concept is we would use the CIP mill levy for maintenance projects within the CIP, which is a fairly sizable amount. But any new projects for expansion, enhancement, anything like that, we would identify alternate sources of revenue. And those are things that we could discuss at some point and what some of the options would be. But that's the concept here.
Well, and just to put a finer point on it, one of the concepts that Mark has discussed with me is whether or not you talk about a referendum for some of the enhancements as we go forward. So for park improvement projects, for fire stations, police stations, under this concept, you would then go out to referendum, whether it's, probably for sales tax, or you'd have some other kind of pitch in terms of a piece of the property tax that would be devoted to that, but it would be a conscious decision on the part of the council. It's just a concept that we've kicked around a little bit, but we haven't really refined it all. And the question is, do you want to bring to the public then enhancements and allow them to vote on those, or do you want us to continue to do the CIP the way we do? And try to balance maintenance projects with enhancements.
I'd like to hear options. How would that affect our credit rating?
Well, I think as long as we reduce the mill levy commensurate with the debt service that we have, the rating agencies would view it impartially. I mean, obviously, if we cut our mill levy too much and couldn't service our debt, they would not like that at all. But actually, I think it'd probably be a positive, because if you identified a alternative source of revenue for enhancement projects like the sales tax, I think they'd view that as a positive.
Okay, yeah, I support taking a look at that.
So this would be moving CIP dollars more towards a direct service fund. So when we have then this will be a policy discussion. I'll bring up the two probably controversial policy discussions too. But if we're looking at a dirt street program, moving funds that were allocated to dirt street program towards maintenance of our current roads would allocate from debt service fund to the general budget, and that could be a way to supplement some of those funds. And then if we're looking for enhancement and improvements, that could be a sales tax referendum discussion in the future for more of a policy discussion for the community as a whole.
Right. That's the concept.
Okay, thank you.
And Mark, just another question. So we're thinking about this for 2028, correct? Not for 26? Because there's some projects that are in the pipeline already that, we've invested significant dollars into through design work. And so just curious about that. And then I also wonder, I think we'd have to come, and I'm just thinking out loud because this is the first time I've heard this, and I'm excited to hear more. I think we should look at every option. But there are some things in the CIP that we have to do, even though it's not maintained, it's enhanced, maybe because of water or storms, storms or BNR, whatever it may be. So I think if we decide to go to the, maintenance-only model, if you will, there has to be some buts included in that.
Right, you would
Yeah.
exempt utility projects,
yeah.
for instance, from this. But all we're trying to ask is, are you interested in us pursuing that option to give something to you to look at? Okay.
I think my only concern about that, I always like going out to the voters on that, but will we get to a point where the nice things that we want to see happen in parts of our community, will they actually happen? Will we go out there? We have to combat misinformation now. We've seen that with other things. And how much can we really do to gauge whether people are wanting to settle for what we have or truly invest in ourselves? And we've been talking about that for so long, even with Project Wichita. And it just seems that oftentimes as we come up with things that can improve our quality of life and those discussions, a lot of people will settle. And I think if this body was making decisions for those nicer things, our aquatics plan and all of that, we will make that decision more times than not, and our community benefits from it. And that would really be my only concern about, hey, let's put all these nice things out there and say, hey, let's go put it out for a 1 cent sales tax when we actually can make some of those things happen. I don't know how many folks would have actually voted for the aquatics plan, but Wichita loves it.
Right, there's no doubt that that's the challenge. But we'll bring something forward. I am mindful of the fact that we've got a transition from this into a normal meeting, into your 6 o'clock meeting. So we'd like to end this in just a couple of minutes, if that's all right. But we have one last thing in this tier, and that is the stabilization reserve. And I'll let Elizabeth talk about that.
Just quickly, that's on page 8 of your handout. The city council approved policy 40 last year. And there's been transfers into the stabilization because these cyclically driven revenues, particularly interest earnings and then franchise fees also to a bit for a time, have been quite strong. The balance of it is significant at this point. It's $32.4 million. The thing to remember there is that it's intended for one-time uses, which those could be for one-time expenditures. They also could be one-time uses that transition you into 2026. And there also could be used for addressing cyclical challenges, but we're dealing with a structural deficit in 2026, so that wouldn't be an eligible use. So that is the last one on tier 3. And we did not identify a dollar amount for that one. And then there's some other options on pages 9 through 10 that you can also consider. Again, I think we've been talking since January. We're not at a great place when it comes to 2026 as far as the dollars, but I think we're in a good place when it comes to planning and the timeline. So continue to think about these things. We'll get the simulator stood up, get the budget, the proposed budget put together, and then
If I can
Keep
just say,
going.
on table 6, the other concepts, those are mostly things that we're going to work on administratively, but we wanted you to know they're in the works. For instance, I know code enforcement is an issue. We are going through a study right now to look at pinch points in the code enforcement process, why it takes so long to get some properties to the point of final compliance. And so we're trying to do some process improvements there to see if we can't pick up efficiencies in a way that maybe frees up staff to be able to deal with more cases. So the rest of it, the item 34, we started to flatten the organization during the recession. There's been some erosion of that effort, and I guess we want to revisit it to see if we should be looking at readjusting based on what's happened in the last 10 years roughly. So everything else we can bring forward, and I don't know that we need a lot of policy direction at this point. So.
Can you make sure to keep us up to date on those?
Yes.
I had some, I approve of the code enforcement, looking at that. Street lighting, that was one that kind of stuck out to me. I know we were a little behind as far as maintaining a lot of that. And also forestry, cutting back, they're so far behind too.
The street lighting, as you know, most of that is the Evergy system, it's not ours, and so all we're trying to do is right-size the amount of money that Evergy charges us and that we pay, and I think that's a budget adjustment, to be honest with you, to make sure that our numbers are accurate, which I think will lead to a reduction.
Quick question. We have 2 openings for 2 city judges. We have a decrease in the court utilization. Would it be prudent to look if we maybe only need to hire 1 city judge instead of 2? And maybe use, if there's a caseload, then use retired judges to fill in and stuff.
So we did talk about doing a process improvement. We didn't talk about looking at the judges' workloads or the workloads going through the court, but I think that could be part of this review. I don't know that that will be accomplished in time for the 2nd judge vacancy, though. We'll have to do some internal discussion in that regard.
Thank you.
And also item number 35, the pension reserve, I think that's something definitely worth a deeper discussion on at some point.
all right, well, best of luck with the rest of your
I
meeting.
hope that was helpful. I
Yeah.
think when we did this during COVID, pardon me?
More questions now than I did before.
Well, that's the idea, right? Maybe what we can do, if it would make any difference, Mayor, I'll leave this up to you, but if the council would feel more comfortable having one more workshop to go through any of this and maybe some last-minute issues, we do need to start producing the document, and I have to present it to you in July. So any additional guidance, if you'd like to have that one last session, we could do that, maybe.
I think I'm getting some head nods. We would like an additional.
Okay, great.
I think there's just too many big ticket items that could be at,
Yeah, and I think that.
jeopardy.
Yeah, that could help us scope our review of things too. And, as you get started, what are we looking at?
Yep.
So to give us some scope and a framework.
Yep. We'll try to refine some of this that you've seen now, and if you didn't just take it off the table, and there wasn't much that you did that to, some of those really big ticket items, we can talk about a few options.
Yeah.
Would that also have a space for not only like more in-depth conversation on this, but also some policy discussion? Sounds like there's a few things that some of us want to talk about.
If it's possible that we can staff you that way, I think some of the ones that are going to be the most in-depth are ones you're going to need a lot more data, and those are the things we would talk about during the rest of '24 to position us for decisions in '25.
Yeah.
that impact 26. And that was what Elizabeth said at the beginning. We're trying to set that stage so you don't have your back up against the wall at the end.
Right, and how I was envisioning this looking in the budget is that when you open the budget, there's a bunch of intro stuff, and then there's a transmittal letter that provides you an overview of the budget, and then there's some budget policy issues. And this would be a policy issue, but it would be more general concepts to demonstrate that we're going to be working on this rather than changing head counts and line items and things like that.
One thing that I would be interested in too is that, for example, 35, when we talk about employee pensions, that, and I see in here it says that it's not recommended, and I completely agree with that. But how will we solicit more information from our employees to see how this might impact them? If we hear that employees, say, wow, this would be a game changer for me, and I'd probably look for another job. I mean, I just want to know how we're going to make sure that we're making decisions that are involving the people that will be impacted by what we decide as much as we can. So
Yeah, I think-
that would be also helpful for me in the process.
I'm going to work with the union representatives a little bit and some of our other employees. We've had some informal discussions about what do employees today value versus what they valued, 15, 20 years ago. And we've kind of we have a benefit package that reflects old thinking. And I've been told by some newer employees that I don't really care about a pension system. I don't know if I'm going to be here long enough to get it, but I would like, if you can give me more money or you can do something on some other benefit, that's important to me. I don't know if those are one-offs or whether that's how our employees feel, and whether a cafeteria approach to benefits is the right way to go. There's also the benevolent employer who does insist on certain benefits just because that's the right thing to do for employees. So it could be a robust discussion with our employees as we go forward.
Will any of these, I'm sorry.
I think that the conversation also, I think as you mentioned, talking to the bargaining units regarding this as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have some representatives here at the table or in front of the audience.
Right.
And so just having, again, more stakeholders having that conversation
Yep.
about the future of what workforce is really most motivated by.
Yep.
Is it more pay, or is it the better benefits down the road? Is it the health insurance? Is it really the pension program? Asking these questions not just to our employees, but also obviously to the bargaining units who represent
Right.
many of our employees.
Yep.
And are we going to pass this through the Employee Retirement Board and Police and Fire, and let them take a look at it as well?
We're really far away from
Yeah.
doing that, right? Let's have these discussions. We were joking when I was talking to some of the employee reps. We're all much older than the people that they represent and a lot of our employee base. So it's important we get employee input, not just, from a few of us, so.
Yeah,
Hey, you
and,
get-
and I have penciled, for my sake, I penciled last September, I presented an update to you on our ARPA recovery plan that we finish up every year in July, and I presented it to you in September. So that might be a good time for an update on some of these things too. So it's always a pleasure. I'm glad you're so interested. We'll try to keep up the good work to support you all.
I think
Great
we-
job, Elizabeth.
And just
Thank
a
you.
reminder, the simulator will be available starting tomorrow.
I think tomorrow, yes, it will be better than ever.
And thank you. I think it was a reminder to community to participate, and I see that more people are coming in for our 6 o'clock meeting, but to participate in the simulator, which reminds people that we're about to face a $12 million deficit. So tough decisions will have to be made, and conversations, especially right here at the benches, we've been talking about the 35 different options. These are the tough conversations we're going to have, and they're not fun, but it's to put us in a better position moving forward. And so, again, our responsibility is to be fiscally responsible. So being prudent with taxpayer dollars is exactly what we want to do. And so being part of that simulation process, I think, will help community understand just how difficult these decisions really are.
One last thing before you hop off here. What's the current revenue in the stabilization reserve and also the permanent reserve?
Those are the same, one and the same.
Okay.
And it's on page 8, it's 32.4 million. It's toward the bottom of the page,
Okay, I see.
yes. Right. Ready to sign off? Okay.
Thank you very much. We will now recess so that we can come back for our 6 o'clock meeting. Thank you very much.